Number 1.
Mary was a secretary at C&S Bank in Atlanta, Georgia in 1965. The bank is now called Nations Bank. She had married Roy Little, a bank examiner, 6 weeks prior to her disappearance. Roy was out of town on October 14, training to become an auditor, but was going to return the next day. Mary planned a party to welcome his return. She purchased groceries after work and then met a co-worker for dinner at the Piccadilly Cafeteria in the Lenox Square shopping center in the upscale Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta. Mary was reportedly in good spirits at the time and spoke happily about her married life. She walked back to her car after dinner at approximately 8 p.m. She has never been heard from again. Mary did not show up for work the next morning and did not call in sick. Her boss discussed her absence with the co-worker she dined with the previous evening. Mary's co-worker knew that Mary's new metallic pearl gray 1965 Mercury Comet with the Georgia license plate number 2829 was parked in a lot near Lenox Square from the previous evening's dinner. A photograph of the Comet is posted with this case summary. Initially, the car could not be located by security guards, but by the time Mary's bank supervisor arrived at Lenox Square, the car was in plain sight in the yellow 32 section, where it was supposed to be. There was a coating of red dust on the car's exterior, as if it had been driven on a dirt road. 4 bags of groceries were found inside the vehicle, along with Coke bottles and a package of Kent cigarettes, which were Mary's preferred brand. There was also a slip, panties, a girdle, a bra, and a single stocking. Most of the items had been neatly folded and placed on the console between the front bucket seats, but the brassiere and the stocking were on the floor. The stocking had been cut, probably by a knife. The underwear was Mary's and appeared to have been worn recently. Mary's outer clothes, purse, coat, jewelry, and her car keys were missing and have never been found. Blood was speckled on the undergarments and smeared on the steering wheel, the driver's side door near the handle, the inside window of the passenger's side, and on the front seats. Testing proved it was probably Mary's blood. There was only a very small amount, about as much as would come from a nosebleed. Some police officers were of the opinion that the scene had been staged due to the great smearing of the small quantity of blood. There was an unidentified fingerprint in the blood on the steering wheel. Investigators learned that Mary's gasoline credit card had been used twice in North Carolina on October 15, the day following her disappearance. The first time was at an Esso station in Mary's hometown of Charlotte, the second time was at another Esso in Raleigh. Attendants at both stations recalled seeing a woman who appeared to have a minor injury to her head and was bloodstained on her head and legs. Both workers told authorities that the woman was traveling with 1 or 2 unshaven middle-aged men who seemed to be commanding her. The woman appeared to be trying to hide her face from the attendants, and she did not ask anyone for help. The credit card had been used in the early morning hours of October 15 in Charlotte and approximately 12 hours later in Raleigh. This puzzled investigators. Not only was Charlotte Mary's hometown and the city where her family resided, but Raleigh was only 2 to 3 hours away by car. The long span of time between credit card usages seemed strange, considering the short traveling distance between the cities. Authorities speculate that perhaps whoever had Mary was trying to lead the investigation away from Atlanta. The signatures on the credit slips read Mrs. Roy H. Little Jr. and appeared to be in Mary's handwriting. Using Roy's mileage logs and Mary's odometer, investigators estimated that the car had been driven only 41 miles that could not be accounted for. Another odd angle of Mary's case emerged when the license plate on her Mercury Comet turned out to be a Charlotte, North Carolina plate that had been stolen in mid-October. Mary's car was legal in Georgia and had been fitted with the proper tags. Investigators believed that the stolen plate was a clue as to why her vehicle had not been located by Lenox Square security before her bank supervisor drove to the lot and discovered her car himself. Authorities believed that whoever drove Mary's car to the lot may have kept it hidden on the night of her disappearance, only to return it to its initial parking spot later. This theory has never been proven. If the car was in fact moved, it would have been at about the same time that Mary was seen in North Carolina. A $20,000 ransom demand was made for Mary after news about the credit card slips came out. An anonymous caller told Roy to go an overpass in the Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina and find further instructions posted on a sign. An FBI agent went to the location in Roy's place and found a blank piece of paper stuck to the sign. The caller did not contact the Little family again and has never been identified. The ransom demand is suspected to be a hoax. Police investigated Roy for possible involvement in his wife's disappearance. Her former roommates did not like him, and some refused to attend their wedding because of it. Roy reportedly did not seem to care much about Mary's disappearance. Several times he refused to take a lie detector test. However, he had a solid alibi for the time of her disappearance and nothing to gain from her death, and there were no signs of trouble in the marriage. Roy has never been charged with any wrongdoing in connection with Mary's case. There was some speculation that Mary's disappearance might have been connected to a sex scandal at her place of employment around the time she vanished. The bank had hired a former FBI agent to investigate claims of lesbian sexual harassment and possible prostitution on the property. Mary apparently knew about the scandal, but it is not now believed to have anything to do with her disappearance. Friends told investigators that Mary had been receiving unsettling phone calls at work during the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She apparently gave some indications to the caller that she was married and could no longer visit with the unknown person, but he or she was welcome to visit her. The caller's identity remains a mystery. Mary also received flowers from a secret admirer in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The bouquets were traced to a florist near Mary's residence, but the purchaser's identity remains unknown. Mary never shared the details of the strange phone calls or discussed the flowers with anyone. According to some of her friends, she was fearful of being home alone or driving her car unaccompanied in the weeks prior to October 14. She did not explain why she felt unsafe. A few days before she disappeared, Mary insinuated to her co-workers that she had something important to tell them. She never revealed what it was. In May 1967, 18 months after Mary vanished, another young woman who worked in the same office was murdered. Diane Shields was last seen leaving work in her blue and white Chevrolet Impala. At 2:30 a.m. the next day, the car was found near a laundry on Sylvan Road in Atlanta, with Shields' body inside the trunk. She was fully clothed and had not been sexually assaulted, and she was still wearing her diamond engagement ring. She had died of suffocation, a scarf had been shoved down her throat. Police speculated that Mary's and Shields' cases might be connected due to the similarities in their disappearances and the fact that the women worked together, but eventually that theory was discarded. Shields' homicide, like Mary's disappearance, remains unsolved. The police file concerning Mary's case vanished sometime in the years following her 1965 disappearance. Her father died in 1979, but her mother is still alive and has never stopped looking for her. Some police officers who investigated Mary's case do not believe foul play was involved, they think Mary staged her disappearance for unknown reasons. Other investigators believe Mary was abducted. A woman reported being accosted by a man in the Lenox Square shopping center parking lot shortly before Mary would have been walking to her car. Some authorities believe the man had something to do with Mary's disappearance. He has never been unidentified. Mary's case remains active and unsolved.
Number 2.
Betty was married to John David Smith III at the time of her 1991 disappearance. The couple met in Betty's native Niceville, Florida in 1990 and married that same year. A photo of John is posted with this case summary. He filed for divorce from Betty in January 1991, but the couple reconciled in May and moved to New Jersey. Betty's family told authorities that John had seemed to be mild-mannered prior to Betty's disappearance, but they later learned he was abusive towards his wife. Betty called her daughter at approximately 8:30 a.m. on October 4, 1991, from the couple's West Windsor Township, New Jersey residence. Betty gave no indication that anything was amiss and did not mention any travel plans. She was recovering from a broken hip at the time, which would have made traveling difficult. Betty has never been seen or heard from again. John told Betty's family that he believed she went on an impromptu trip. Her relatives did not believe this claim and began to investigate her disappearance themselves. They learned that John had previously been married to Janice Hartman Smith from 1970 to 1974, while he initially told Betty's family that their marriage was his first. Janice vanished from Ohio in November 1974, just days after her divorce from John had been finalized. John reported Janice as a missing person 2 days later. Janice's case remained unsolved until 2000. Her photo is posted with this case summary. John was never charged in connection with either of his wives' disappearances in the 1990s and moved to California after Betty vanished. He married for a third time in 1998. Janice's remains were located in an Indiana roadside ditch in 1980, 6 years after she was last seen. Her legs had been cut off below the knees. She was not identified until 2000. John, who had by then moved to California, was charged with aggravated murder in Janice's case in the fall of 2000. His third wife initially supported him, but filed for divorce and a restraining order shortly before his arrest. She learned about John's abusive background and also cited the murder of his first wife and unsolved disappearance of his second spouse. John was found guilty of Janice's murder in 2001. The jury rejected the aggravated murder charge and convicted him of simple murder instead. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison and is currently incarcerated in Ohio. Foul play is suspected in Betty's disappearance due to the circumstances involved. John is not charged in her case, but he was found liable for her wrongful death in a civil suit in 2002 and was ordered to pay $1 million to her family. Betty has never been located. It is unlikely that her family will be able to collect on the civil action. The FBI is attempting to identify two women pictured in photographs found in John's collection at the time of his 2000 arrest. Investigators would like to ascertain the women's whereabouts, given John's history. Their photos are posted with this case summary.
Number 3.
Baumgardner was a senior art major at Ohio Wesleyan University in 1937. She belonged to the Delta Delta Delta, or Tri-Delt, sorority and lived alone in room 319 in Austin Hall on the Ohio Wesleyan campus. She resided with her parents in the 2000 block of Arthur Avenue in Lakewood, Ohio, when she was not at college. On the evening of her disappearance, Baumgardner practiced for a singing competition, then studied in her dormitory for a test which was scheduled the following day. Her sorority sisters last saw her shortly after 11 p.m. on May 4, 1937. She had her hair up in curlers and pins and was behaving normally at the time. Sometime before midnight she said goodbye to her friends. She has never been seen or heard from again. The Tri-Delts alerted campus authorities about Baumgardner's disappearance at 10:30 p.m. the following day when they realized she hadn't attended any of her classes. Subsequent investigation revealed that someone, probably Baumgardner herself, had left her dormitory room key on the back corner of an Austin Hall staircase between the second and third floors. Her new red Dodge was found parked undisturbed in its regular garage. The key was in the ignition. Baumgardner's room was in perfect order, which is uncharacteristic of her. Her bed did not appear to have been slept in, her hairpins had been put away, and her pajamas and robe were hanging in the closet. The alarm clock had been set for 6 a.m. and had run down, indicating that she got up at that time on May 5 and left Austin Hall without being seen. She is believed to have been carrying an old handbag at the time and probably no more than $5 in cash. Baumgardner's watch, sorority pin and some loose change were left behind in her room. Initially it was believed that Baumgardner had suffered an amnesiac episode and wandered away from campus. The theory was bolstered by several reported sightings of her in the Delaware area in the days following her disappearance. None of the sightings were confirmed, however. At the time she went missing, Baumgardner was worried about whether she would get enough credit hours to graduate on schedule, and in the last letter she wrote to her parents, she stated that she had many things to and did not know how she was going to do them all, and she was very, very tired. However, she was never located, which is unusual in cases of amnesiac disappearances. Authorities investigated the possibility that Baumgardner left of her own accord, possibly with a boyfriend, since several of the reported sightings placed her with a young man. However, Baumgardner was happily engaged to her boyfriend in Lakewood, and her friends did not believe she was seeing anyone else. There is also no evidence of foul play in her case, although a local resident living near the Ohio Wesleyan campus reported hearing screams between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. on May 5. Little evidence is available in Baumgardner's case. Her disappearance is no longer being investigated by police due to the passage of time, but her case remains a mystery.
Number 4.
Kayla was last seen on August 11, 2009. That evening, she was with a 24-year-old friend, Kevin J. Chesky. A photo of Chesky is posted with this case summary. He drove her around her hometown of Antigo, Wisconsin, and the pair allegedly smoked marijuana. Sometime between 9 o'clock and 11 p.m., Chesky dropped Kayla off at her boyfriend's home in Wausau, Wisconsin, about a 40-minute drive from Antigo. He stated the house, which is across the street from the Colonial Manor nursing home, had all the lights turned off, and it looked as if no one was home. Chesky never actually saw Kayla go inside it. She has never been heard from again. Kayla wasn't reported missing for 6 days because her parents, who are separated, each thought she was in the other one's home. Her parents had a fairly open living arrangement for her and her younger brother, and they often traveled back and forth by themselves between one parent's house and another. Kayla, her brother and her mother had moved to Texas earlier in 2009, but the two children were homesick, and after just 3 months their mother took them and moved back to Wisconsin. Authorities initially believed Kayla was a runaway, and they stated her friends appeared evasive, as if they were trying to conceal her whereabouts. Police began to reconsider the runaway theory as weeks passed without any contact. Her boyfriend denied having seen her the day of her disappearance. He is 4 years older than Kayla, and her mother didn't approve of the relationship because of the age difference. The house Kayla went to on the night of her disappearance had actually been condemned, and its occupants had moved out while the building was being renovated, but it's unclear whether she knew about this. In October 2009, Chesky was arrested and charged with second-degree reckless endangerment, a felony. This is related to substance use with Kayla on the night she was last seen. The charge was dismissed in July 2011, however. Chesky hasn't been charged or named as a suspect in her actual disappearance, and he is no longer cooperating with the investigation. Kayla is described as a passionate gymnast who was looking forward to being on her school's team. She didn't own a cellular phone or a computer at the time of her disappearance and apparently didn't use the internet very much. She has no history of running away from home, and it's uncharacteristic of her not to keep her parents informed of her whereabouts. Although there is no evidence of foul play in her case, her mother believes she was abducted. Her case remains unsolved.
Number 5.
Alicia was last seen in Murfreesboro, Tennessee on April 10, 2015. She is severely physically and mentally disabled and has been cared for by her parents, Florence Elaine Waters and Charles Waters, all her life. A photo of Florence is posted with this case summary. Alicia has a trust fund of over $1 million set aside for her care, money from a medical malpractice settlement. Her parents, as her caregivers, could receive up to $9,000 a month from the account. There were allegations that Alicia's parents were misusing the money, including a report that they spent some of it on a swimming pool for themselves. As a result, a Murfreesboro attorney was appointed as conservator, and he is in charge of how the money will be disbursed. Florence and Charles came to Rutherford County Chancery Court in Tennessee once a month for about a year and were increasingly uncooperative and combative, refusing to allow court officials to check on how Alicia was doing. Then they sold their house and moved away, leaving a forwarding address in Duluth, Georgia. Alicia's parents have not collected money from the trust fund since then. They also haven't collected any of Alicia's Social Security disability payments since 2006, when the Social Security Administration started asking her parents questions about how the money was being spent. A warrant was issued for Florence's arrest in January 2017. She is supposed to be taken before the Chancery Court to show cause for why she should not be held in contempt for failing to disclose Alicia's whereabouts. Later in 2017, a Georgia television news station went to the Duluth address and spoke to Alicia's father, Charles. He admitted his identity but refused to disclose where Florence and Alicia were. He said they were together and initially claimed they were in Tennessee, then admitted this was untrue. He said Alicia was alive and being cared for. Neighbors reported they hadn't seen anyone in a wheelchair at the house. Investigators are concerned for Alicia's safety, as they cannot think of a reasonable explanation why her parents would have walked away from her trust fund. Her parents no longer have legal custody of her, and the court has offered a reward for information leading to her whereabouts. The circumstances of her disappearance are unclear.
Number 6.
Diane Louise August was born on February 21, 1958, and lived in Odessa, Florida. During the 70s and 80s, August was married to Frederick and had a son and 2 daughters. During that time, she was a stay-at-home mom and seemed to be very happy with her life. She was passionate about art and the outdoors. In 1988, at age 30, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She would regularly stop taking her medication and started getting into a lot of trouble. Her mother, Mildred Young, stated that her daughter was very trusting of strangers and began to befriend the wrong people. August soon spiraled into alcohol and drugs. As a result, by 1991 she was divorced and had lost custody of her children. On a few occasions, August had gone missing, but always returned home within a couple of days. During the next decade, August was involuntarily institutionalized 32 times. After the last time, she moved in with her sister, Deborah Cronin. On April 10, at 11 a.m., Deborah said goodbye to her sister and left her home to go to a doctor's appointment. When she returned home, August was gone. Diane August was 40 years old when she went missing and had not taken medication since her release from the healthcare facility 2 weeks before. August's mother, along with others who knew her, do not think that she should have been released from the institution. August did not simply vanish, there were a few credible sightings of her. On the day she disappeared, she went to a pub, Hay Loft, approximately 3 miles from the house. August did not have a car, so she must have been with friends or hitchhiked. The bartender soon denied her drinks because she was acting weird and walking in circles. The next day, at 4 p.m., August was seen walking north on the US 19. For an unknown reason, it is not certain which day exactly, but sometime from the 11th to the 14th, August was seen at the Coral Sands Motel on US 19 and Maryland Avenue. On the 14th, August had lunch at the Gulf Hotel's Inn. That night, Mildred had not been home to answer her telephone, but a terrifying message had been left on her machine. August, clearly agitated, said, "Help. Let me out." Scuffling in the background made it seem as someone was trying to take the phone from her. "Hey, Gim," that were her last words before the call abruptly ended. Mildred tried to call back, but no one answered. Although, she does believe her daughter personally knows who she is with. Police weren't able to trace the call. However, the caller ID read Starlight. Although there were at least 6 businesses with that name within a 45-mile radius, none were in Odessa. While a woman walked to work on April 15 at 4 p.m., she found a severed fingertip. It was along the US 19, lying on the ground. The woman didn't think it was real and kept on walking. However, later that night, she told her boyfriend about her finding. He looked for it the next morning, and when he found it and realized it was real, reported it to the police. Interestingly enough, the woman's description of the finger differed greatly from her boyfriend's, leading the police to search for 2 fingertips and not just one. In the end, only 1 fingertip was found, despite a helicopter being assigned to look for body pieces in the nearby area. The fingertip that was recovered, which had coral nail polish, was confirmed to be August's right middle finger. It was compared to fingerprints taken during a prior arrest for petty crime. Authorities tried to come up with a plausible way she could have lost a fingertip, perhaps by having a car door slammed on her fingers. Sometime from April 10 to 18, August's home was robbed. Authorities are not sure if it is related to her disappearance or not. It is possible that teenagers who lived nearby might have had previous permission to have a party at August's house. Deborah worked at a convenience store on State Road, about a mile away from August's home. On April 18, the store manager, Patricia, found a plastic bag hidden inside the outdoor freezer. Inside were neatly folded clothing. When Patricia asked Deborah if she knew anything about it, Deborah recognized the clothes as the ones she had recently given to her sister. Authorities are unsure whether the clothing was put in the freezer before or after August went missing. However, they do suspect the teenagers, who were possibly partying at August's home, to have also put the clothes in the freezer. It is unknown how authorities came to such a conclusion. On November 24, 2000, the Tampa Bay Times published an article about August's disappearance. Around 4 p.m. the next day, Terry Wilson, August's brother's girlfriend, went to a Circle K to buy a soda and a pack of cigarettes. While in the store, Wilson noticed a clear Ziploc bag on the lottery counter with Diane written on it in black Sharpie. In it were black eyeliner, a bottle of Taboo perfume, a tube of bright pink lipstick, and a tube of generic toothpaste identical as the one August had received from the healthcare facility she attended weeks prior to her disappearance. Wilson showed the bag to Mildred, and she confirmed that the items in the bag were her daughter's. Interestingly enough, Viva Villas, a neighborhood which August used to visit, was near the Circle K. A few months before her disappearance. August had been picked up by police because she was walking around the neighborhood in a manic state. There is one suspect. Gary Robert Evers. Evers and his girlfriend, Rose Casper, bought the Coral Sands Motel in 1997. It was a disparaged building near the US 19 and was known to attract problematic people. Evers and Casper lived in a mobile home parked in the back, which also served as their office. On June 27, 2001, 2 armed men in black ski masks broke into their office. Casper had her face beaten and was pistol whipped. Meanwhile, Evers heard her screaming and grabbed a gun. When he burst out of the back bedroom, the masked men fled. Evers was certain he knew who one of the gunmen had been. Todd Kramers, a 26-year-old with a criminal history. Kramers ran the neighborhood, and so Evers was convinced he had used a mask to cover his true identity. The day after the break-in, Evers invited him to his office. Despite Kramers repeatedly denying his involvement, Evers shot him multiple times with his 9mm pistol. It was later discovered that Kramers had been telling the truth. 2 different men were charged with the robbery. Authorities have not divulged why Evers is a suspect in August's disappearance. However, there are some clear connections between the two. The last reported sighting of August was at the Coral Sands Motel, and her finger was found nearby. Evers did not have a prior criminal record in Florida. In 2004, Evers was convicted of first-degree murder of Krammers and sentenced to life without parole. He died in prison 8 years later. 20 years later, Diane Louise August is still missing. There have been no major breakthroughs since 2001. If alive, she is now 62 years old.
Number 7.
Blake was living at a special needs boarding school, the Setu School, in Running Springs, California at the time of his disappearance. He had been enrolled in the school only since June 1 and had told his mother he was homesick and wanted to leave. He was last seen at 8 p.m. on June 26, 1994, as he walked to a barn on the property to check on the animals. A staff member saw a light go on in the barn shortly afterwards. Blake did not return to his dormitory by the 10 p.m. curfew and then has not been seen again. Searchers tracked him to a nearby highway, but no further. There were numerous reported sightings of Blake in California and Utah in 1994 and 1995, but none of them have been confirmed. He is from Flagler, Colorado, and may be somewhere in that state. Many agencies classify Blake's disappearance as a runaway. The school officials believe he ran away, but his family thinks he may have been abducted or lured from the school grounds. Curiously, Blake is not the only student to have disappeared from the Setu School and never been found. John Inman disappeared from the school in 1993 and Daniel Ewan in 2004. The Setu School filed for bankruptcy and closed in 2005. No suspects have been identified in Blake's disappearance, and his case remains unsolved.